Microphone, please, Colin.
We are back online. Councillors, the meeting has resumed, and we are at the stage where we have motion on the table. It is an alternative motion moved by Councillor Toohey, and we have discussed it for and against, and we actually are at the stage of voting, but I believe Councillor Toohey would like to say something else.
Mr Mayor, just in regards to this motion, I would like to withdraw the alternative motion that I put forward and put forward an alternative motion.
Thank you, Councillor Toohey. To withdraw, just a point of clarification, Mr Cannizzaro, seconder to that?
A mover and a seconder is required to withdraw the motion.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Rotino
Point of order, Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Reeves.
It sounds like the councillor is actually putting forward two motions. He's one, withdrawing it, and then secondly, putting forward a second motion. Which is it? And I've already foreshadowed that I originally moved the original motion, and I feel that I haven't had that fair opportunity to have that tested.
Point taken there. So I will say now that we have a mover and a seconder to withdraw Councillor Toohey's motion. So and we'll put this to the vote. All those in favour of withdrawing the motion? Okay, thank you. That's 7-2, and Councillor Buckley and Councillor Peltz have actually voted against that. So the motion is withdrawn, and Councillor Reeves, you may go back to your original comments.
Mayor and councillors, I'd like to move that that the original motion as provided be put.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Ellis has seconded Councillor Reeves.
Well, councillors,
so wish to speak to it, Councillor Reeves?
Yeah, no, thank you, councillors, and sorry for the confusion and the matters that have gone on then, especially for our viewing public. The discussion points that I raised around why I wouldn't support the alternative motion can be applied again as to why I support the original recommendation, and that is around the investment in time and money and community consultation around the Eagle Point structure plan that does have statutory weight. And even today, councillors, you've heard an eloquent overture from a series of objectors around this particular proposal. Councillors, there's a range of product sizes available in the Eagle Point structure plan, and this particular development is a much more intensive development than the structure plan suggests, and there is opportunity within Eagle Point for smaller developments and larger developments, but we want ordered development. It gives investors the opportunity to know where they can invest. It gives buyers the opportunity to know where they can buy and have certainty around the neighbourhood character, their neighbours, and the type of suburb and hinterland that they're living in. Councillors, I urge you to respect the process that's been undertaken around consultation with the structure plan and to support this particular recommendation and to as noted in the minutes, in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Ellis, you've seconded the motion. You wish to speak?
I do, Mr Mayor. I want to explain the reasons I've said after speaking against the earlier motion, and the reasons why I've seconded Councillor Reeves is for purposes of transparency and good governance in council, and to ensure that there is proper debate on items before council. I personally hold a bit different view to Councillor Reeves in relation to it, based on precedents, not on the undermining of a structure plan, nor that, but simply on precedents, thinking back to what has occurred. I don't think I need to really push my words before again, but it's a matter of governance, and councillors, we need to be in control of our meetings and focused on the issues before us clearly. I thank Councillor Reeves for his insistence in maintaining his position in terms of his foreshadowing of his motion and for his eloquent argument. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. So would anyone else wish to speak for or against? Councillor Buckley wish to speak.
Yeah, I have a question.
No, you can't. It's just if you wish to speak for or against the motion.
Well, I want to know what I'm voting about. This has got so confusing. I want to know whether we're voting for the original motion of refusal, or we're voting for on the new motion that we allow the development to go ahead.
I can clarify that for you, Councillor Buckley. We are voting for the council recommendation in the agenda today, which is a notice of refusal. So, Councillor Rotino.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll speak against it only because, as I mentioned before, it's at odds to the state planning scheme, where if blocks can be serviced adequately and in that zoning type, it's encouraged for this type of development. And also that even though we've got the adoption of the Eagle Point structure plan, it still has a long way to go, where it'll go on exhibition, and I'm sure there will be further input from the community before it's actually finalised and signed off by the Minister for Planning, as the process described by Ms Reynolds earlier on.
Thank you, Councillor Rotino. Anybody else? Councillor Toohey and then Councillor Belts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I must apologise for my ineloquent alternative proposal. It was a bit clumsy of me, but I will be voting against the proposal as per our agenda. My original alternative was to ask for the proposal to be approved as per the plans that we have been given. So I'm now in the position where I will vote against the proposal as it stands. Thank you.
Councillor Peltz.
I'll be voting against this because I believe people in our community should be able to do developments in the manner that they wish to, and I believe that the original guidelines were very stringent, and I know they're there for a purpose, but I do feel they overburden developers with regards to what is actually necessary and what is actually just let's make it happen because it makes everything look nice. So with regards to that, I'm happy to vote against it. I'm a bit more of a realist, I suppose, and I do like the ad hoc stuff that Mark was referring to. Pardon? The adhocracy stuff that Mark was alluring to earlier, because I think to be flexible in the manner of planning is actually the basis of what we need to achieve and to be accommodating. So happy to go with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. No more councillors wishing to speak? All right, then, councillors, we'll put this to the vote. All those in favour of adopting the council's recommendation?
Point of order, Mayor. Right of reply.
I apologise.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. It is difficult, and I acknowledge the good work you're doing in managing the meeting. So thank you under the circumstances. Councillors, we've heard some extraordinary arguments, and imagine if anybody could do anything they wanted to in terms of development. We would have conflicts of use. There would be all kinds of inconsistencies, industrial estates, residential estates, farming operations. Goodness only knows what's going on. You know, a gas treatment plant next to a kindergarten, if anybody wanted to do whatever they wanted to. That's the most absurd statement I've ever heard. And councillors, we really do need to pay heed to looking after our community and the legacy that we will leave in our decisions. There's been many occasions in my experience as a councillor, only a number of years, where we're still retrieving the bad decisions of the past. And they're often hasty decisions that are ill-considered. And councillors, the consideration here is to think about what the legacy is, and a variety of products, a variety of property sizes that are available in Eagle Point, with order and planning and consideration that are given through the consultative process that's taken place to land that Eagle Point structure plan. And I do appreciate the comments that have been made about good governance and transparency. That's what we really need to do. The precedence is important. We can't retrospectively plan. We have to plan for the future, and that's what we're doing here, councillors. So I urge you to vote in favour of the recommendation, and if it is that important, then I'm sure it'll be tested through other processes. But thanks for that opportunity for the reply there, Mayor and councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves, and again, my apologies.
That's okay. It is a challenge to manage the meeting, and you're doing a great job. Thanks.
All right, councillors, now all those in favour, please. All those against. Okay, the motion is lost. Those for was Councillor Roberts, Councillor Reeves and myself. Councillor O'Connell, you voted for, didn't you?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so that's...
Mr Mayor, can I ask a question?
I guess so, Councillor Roberts, but this issue is now resolved.
Okay, we can discuss it later. It's fine. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, just to clarify, was the officer recommendation supported or
No,
defeated?
it's been defeated.
Defeated for 4 votes to 5?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry you didn't...
So we've made no decision.
There is a...
Foreshadowed motion.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz.
I'd like to foreshadow that I would move the alternative recommendation that was requested originally by Councillor Toohey.
And seconded by Councillor Toohey. So, Councillor Peltz.
The new recommendation actually has the guidelines in place with regards to councillor officer requirements and guidelines that could actually move this project forward. So with that in place, it would actually be a recommendation to grant an application to this proposal under those guidelines. Thank you. And it's a notice of rescission. Yep, thank you.
Well, before we go further, could I, and actually before you speak, Councillor Roberts, could everybody please advise whether they actually can view a copy of this new foreshadowed motion?
I don't have a copy, Mr Mayor, unless it was the one that Councillor Rotino circulated.
Yes, that's the one.
Oh, I've got a question.
Councillor Ellis, you can view one, can you? You're on mute, Councillor Ellis.
Yeah, I'm just opening Councillor Rotino's email now.
Yep, I've got it open as well.
Councillor O'Connell?
Yes, I've seen it.
Thank you. We just needed because there are no hard copies floating around that every councillor here can view it also. And I think we'll probably we could get it up on the screen for those in the chamber.
And for the public watching the streaming, Mr Mayor, just to show what we are now about to address.
Yes, that's what we can get it. We're endeavouring to get it up on the screen for everyone to view. Unfortunately, except yourselves, but you do have your email copies. Councillor Roberts.
There is a I'll bring it up in debate. It's fine. Never mind. Sorry, Mr Mayor.
That's fine, but you were filling a space while we're waiting for the motion to be put up on the screen. So actually, Councillor Tu is requested to speak while we're waiting as the seconder of this foreshadowed alternative motion. So go ahead, Colin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The motion as it's now put does include all the appropriate conditions that would otherwise have been on the proposal, which was where I was headed originally. Thank you.
Unfortunately for members of the public who may be watching, we're just having a little bit of difficulty again. The way of doing business as in council at the moment is becoming quite difficult. But
I have a question regarding some of the conditions, Mr Mayor.
I was just about to say, Councillor Roberts, but we must persist to get this right because it is important that we have transparency.
Mr Mayor, we're ready to put up on the screen. Unfortunately, the councillors that are on the online Skype won't be able to see it on screen, but they do have a copy of it, and likewise the members of the public won't be able to see it.
Thank you, Mr Cannizzaro, but the councillors who are online have all identified that they can read it. They have seen it.
It's an email that was just sent.
That's correct. They've all opened them and they have got they can read it, and as we can now read it on the screen, unfortunately for the public, would it be advisable that somebody actually just reads this? So as the members of the public who are listening could know exactly what we're dealing with here?
That's a bit of a big ask, I think, with all greatest respect, Mr Mayor, and I'm counting 5 pages, 6 pages.
Yep, it's pretty impressive.
It's a complex set of conditions for the property. I think we could be here for another 40 minutes while someone read it through and corrected themselves as they went through it.
Well, how about we just cover the main guidelines and it just says planning permit 319/2019. The council, being the responsible authority and having considered all the relevant planning matters, determines that planning applications...
Point of order, is it being read or not, Mayor?
Yeah.
Can they not?
I think we need to answer. Look, Mr Mayor, can I ask the question?
Just stop, please. I'm going to ask for a point of clarification from Mr Cannizzaro as to whether it is a requirement that the public are aware of this.
In this situation, I think they ought to be, but it is very lengthy.
Yeah. Mr Mayor, may I speak? Mr Mayor, if I may have your indulgence, the matter is for council to decide, so that the council is the core group that should be able to have vision of the document. It is a courtesy, I would suggest, to the public, and something we want to be, is transparent and show what we're debating. But it is the decision making is at the council table. Can I ask the question, which I think might solve a lot of problems for people for transparency, is if they have been able to access the agenda as published online and in hard copy, if the conditions on the original refusal motion are the same, then we can answer the question there. And I have reason to think that they may well be similar, or am I wrong? Ms Reynolds might be able to answer that.
I'm not getting any answers from officers at this stage, Councillor Ellis. Yeah, because it was a notice to refuse, there are no conditions.
Okay, that's the case. I'll just go back to that.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to ask another quick question. I apologise for the time. The conditions that are imposed on the that are put on the alternate motion that's been put forward by that Councillor Rotino has forwarded, the inclusion of a Section 173 agreement and various other conditions, are they standard conditions on a project like this?
I think we're possibly best to get that answer from Ms Reynolds. Please, Ms Reynolds.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I haven't seen Councillor Rotino's alternative motion, but I'm able to answer your question. With respect to the Section 173 legal agreement, it is a Vic Roads requirement. It is not a standard condition. However, not with saying that, I believe it is consistent with previous decisions with land that fronts directly to Paynesville Road. Therefore, I am confident in saying to you today that it is consistent with previous decisions in relation to the precinct and land that fronts Paynesville Road. In relation to the balance of the conditions, I again refer to the original alternative motion being the 14 conditions. The conditions are consummate to the land, to the zone being a low density residential zone. So the conditions around construction management, the conditions around road conditions, the conditions around drainage, the conditions around construction and earthworks, the conditions around open space and preparation of landscape plans, the conditions around the telecommunication requirements, the conditions around provision of open space, and the conditions around a time of subdivision and reference to connection to the sewer system, and the conditions around the gas, around the fire, CFA being hydrants and hydrants which appropriate markers. Those conditions upon my reading with Gippsland Water are considered to be appropriate to a low density residential subdivision.
Thank you, Ms Reynolds. So we've got to, was there anyone else that wishes to speak? Councillor Reeves.
Mayor, I'm not actually sure where we're at in the process, what we're speaking to. Is there a motion on the table? I'm actually lost in this at the moment. It's a rather embarrassing situation, and given that there's a lack of ability to make a clear decision that councillors should consider, it goes against everything that I agree with in terms of councillors' obligation to make decisions. But if you don't know what you're deciding on, then how can you make a decision? You need to defer this matter.
Well, at this stage we have our alternative motion. It's been moved by Councillor Peltz and seconded by Councillor Toohey.
Is that where we're at?
Yes, that's where we're at.
Right. Okay.
And that's why I'd ask for anyone wishing to speak. And of course, you've all notified me that you have the copies of this alternative motion, of the alternative planning permit that was emailed to you just recently, which I'm sure you would have all glanced at this stage. Are you all comfortable with that?
Cosy.
Yes, Mr Mayor, let's move forward with this, please. Speakers,
Yes.
let's bring on speakers.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move this recommendation as it endorses the applicant's wishes. I do apologise for the stringent guidelines, but this is the only way we can move this forward. Happy to go with this, and I recommend to all the other councillors this is a resolution to our predicament, and I encourage you to support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Councillor Toohey, we have been over this and over this. Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, as I said before, this covers the economy of scale issue that I mentioned before. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
So, yeah, Councillor Reeves, you basically spoke there before. You were speaking against.
And thanks, I'm happy to continue that if we're at that stage now.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, look, thank you, Mayor, thank you, councillors. This should hardly be considered a predicament. This is an important planning decision that leaves a legacy, councillors. And to be making a decision like this based on a cursory glance, as has been suggested, of a complex 31-point conditioned planning permit just doesn't do justice to what you are making a decision on, councillors. Really, you are intelligent, informed people who need to know what you're making a decision on. You've had all the information in front of you, and yet you're still deciding on an ad hocracy, an ad hocratic approach. And I really urge you, councillors, to consider this. The original proposal that was recommended suggested that the size of the lots should be increased. It would address Councillor Buckley's desire to have intensive development. You would still have a number of lots in there. They just wouldn't be at this smaller size. And that smaller size is really about maximising the benefit to the developer. That's what's happening. It's not about maximising the benefit to the community, councillors. That's what you have to think about. And if you're really councillors for the whole community, then you should consider what you're deciding and how you're deciding this.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Ellis.
Just very briefly, I take note of the comments of Councillor Reeves in relation to the position and the considerations. This is now the third time that we've dealt with this in the sense of briefing, and then at the last ordinary meeting this matter has come through. We've looked at this, it's the complexities of the structure plan. What's happened today was a matter of governance rather than the actual subdivision itself. And so with that in mind, and as I say, based on precedents, I'll be supporting the motion as it stands.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? So that gives you a right of reply. Councillor Peltz?
It sure does, and thank you for that, Mr Mayor, and I'm really pleased that I've understood everything that's gone through this process. I understand what we're endorsing on the applicant. I do read my notes, and I have followed the whole thing as an intelligent councillor. I wish for this to proceed, and I recommend to all the other councillors that if you actually are compassionate and supportive of your community and their ideals of progress within our community, I think it's a very good compromise. The bottom line is building anything in this region is absolutely very difficult compared with the guidelines that we actually have to work within, and I recommend this proposal as a very satisfactory development to be working forward with. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. That leads us to the vote. So, all those in favour?
2, 4, 5. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Ellis. All those against? Thank you. That motion is passed. Councillor Roberts, Councillor Reeves, Councillor O'Connell and myself, Councillor White, have opposed, and it has passed 5-4. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, Ms Reynolds.
Great.
Thank you, Joe, and Colin for your hard work too.
So, councillors, after this lengthy debate on one subject, We are now to 5.2.1, which is a proposal. It's also another planning matter. That is to end a 173 agreement as it relates to 41, 43 and 79 Bunga Creek Road in Lakes Entrance. So this is Ms Pitkin, would you wish to begin the discussion, please? What a day.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, it was just taking me a little while to get back in.
Good, thank you. Did you hear what the item we're up to?
Are we up to 5.2.1?
Yes, we are.
Okay. I'll hand over to Nicole.
Good afternoon, and thank you. This item is at 5.2.1. It's a proposal to end a Section 173 legal agreement as it relates to 41, 43 and 79 Bunga Creek Road. The agreement number is P for Peter 624 303 X for X-ray. Council provided in principle support to end the agreement on the 17th of March 2020. Public notice has been undertaken and has resulted in one written objection. The basis of the grounds of objection relate to an understanding that the land would remain as farming land. The grounds of objection relate to the agreement that it should be retained, the agreement should be retained on the original lot as contained at 43 Lake Bunga Creek Road. In 2017, planning permit was issued on the 31st of January 2018, a planning permit was issued with respect to approving a 3-lot subdivision. It contained a condition which essentially said that the planning permit would have no force or effect until 2 existing legal agreements had been ended or refused. The purpose of the current agreement in which we are discussing was to satisfy a requirement of the former Tambo planning scheme. The Tambo planning scheme requirements have now been superseded by the East Gippsland planning scheme. Property is zoned for rural living zone provisions and a planning permit has been issued to enable further subdivision of the land. Council has considered and determined that the planning permit for the subdivision should issue in accordance with the rural living zone provisions. The second agreement, which relates to the land, has been previously ended in 2019. For the reasons outlined above and in the council report as detailed, it is respectfully requested that council resolve to agree to the ending of Section 173 legal agreement numbered P 624 303 X as it applies to the land described in the council report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Reynolds. Councillors, do you have any questions? Thank you, councillors. There are no questions. Sorry, Councillor Ellis, you do have a question.
Just clarifying, I tried to be in contact with Ms Pitkin from our briefing last week on this to understand, is this land to be attached with, is it lot number 79? I was trying to work out, was it Ms Bassett, the objector's property that was, the suggestion was to be adjoined to at number 43, or is it the applicant, Ms Bowen, at number 79? I'm just trying to get the picture of the property. You can help me there, please.
The proposal to end the legal agreement relates to 3 titles with 3 registered proprietors as they relate to 41, 43 and 79 Bunga Creek Road. There are 3 titles, including the objector's land.
Yes, so it's that the objector at number 43. I'm just trying to see how it fits. That's all.
How it fits. Are you asking, I'm sorry for clarification, you're asking for a description of the subdivision pattern?
Because I'm looking at the diagram as provided in the agenda, and it's got an overall farming property, and it adjoins to it. I'll go back to it. It kind of covers two of the allotments that have been cut off, which are marked in red. Then there are two more smaller blue ones, and then a larger area. And I just wanted to clarify that. I don't want to bog us down. I'm just trying to get that clear.
Yes, certainly. Councillor Ellis. So the subject land as marked in Figure 1,
Yep.
land at 41 and 43 are the two small allotments, in comparatively speaking, so working from left to right, and you'll see two blue dotted lines of
Yep.
two smaller lots. That's the subdivision as proposed. So to answer your question, the recommendation before you and the request before you is to remove or end, sorry, my wrong language, to end the legal agreement as pertaining to the two small lots and the balance lot. And in doing so, the legal agreement would not relate to the two further subdivided lots.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's good. So any more questions? No. I think Councillor Tino, were you wanting to move it? Okay. And Councillor Buckley was seconder. So Councillor Rotino, do you wish to speak?
Only very briefly, Mr Mayor, I see this as an administrative tidy up and no further comments really required. Thanks.
Thank you. Yep. Councillor Buckley, thank you. Did anyone else wish to speak to this? All right, well, we can move along and put this one to the vote. So all those in favour of ending this agreement? That is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So next we have item 5.3.1, which is the adoption of the general valuation for 2020. So, Mr Cannizzaro, do you wish to lead off?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have Liz Collins on the line, Manager of Finance, who can walk us through the report for councillors. So I'll hand over to Liz.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. The Victorian Valuer General undertakes annual revaluations of all councils' rateable and non-rateable properties. We've received certification from the Valuer General of the valuations, which have a value date at 1 January 2020 and an effective date of 1 July 2020. Once council adopts these valuations, they'll then be used for the raising of council rates and charges and the fire services property levy for the 2021 year. There is a recommendation there and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Collins. Again, very good work on your part and your staff. You certainly keep us up to date with what we're worth, that's for sure. So, councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Toohey does.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Liz, just in regards to the valuations, you have said that the Valuer General has dated the valuation for 1 January 2020. How does that affect our community in regards to fire-affected properties, etc.? Has that issue been taken into account with the valuations?
Thank you, Councillor Toohey. The impact from the summer bushfires in terms of a revaluation, as you know, properties where there was impact as a result of the fire have had supplementary valuations undertaken in terms of adjustment to their valuations, which was based on the previous level of valuation. The valuations from 1 January will not it will be the 2021 valuations that will show the total impact across the community for not only the bushfires but potentially COVID-19 and in terms of valuation on properties. So these valuations, whilst the impact of properties have had adjustments, the level of their valuation though was 2019 valuations, but those adjustments have been undertaken already.
Thank you.
Councillors, anyone else wishing to ask Ms Collins a question?
I'd like to ask
Yes,
a question,
Jack.
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Roberts, yes.
Just a procedural one. If somebody receives their rates notice and are not happy with the valuation they've received, they can ask to have that reviewed, can't they, Ms Collins?
Absolutely. There's information that goes out with the rates and valuation notice, and ratepayers have 2 months from the date of the notice to lodge an objection to their valuation. Absolutely.
So I guess I would recommend that if anyone's not happy with their valuation, that they should follow the appropriate channels and have that reviewed.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. Is there any more questions? No. All right. Would somebody like to move this item?
Happy to move it.
Well, Councillor Roberts, yes, you've moved it. Councillor Toohey, sorry, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Toohey seconded it. You can't hear him because he didn't speak. So, Councillor Roberts, would you like to say anything? Read this.
Sure, just really briefly. We're expecting some shock in the community potentially from this new valuation process and with the fires as well. So, and wanted to remind the community that this valuation process is it's not managed by council. It's an external party that's assigned. So I really encourage people to follow the appropriate channels if they're dissatisfied with their valuation, because there are ways and methods of dealing with it. So please do speak up if there is an issue, and yeah, I'm happy to support this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Toohey?
Nothing further to add. Thank you, Mr Mayor. And sorry, Mark.
All right, councillors, those wishing to vote for this item, please raise your hands. Good, that's unanimous. Thank you, Ms Collins. The next item, 5.3.2, is our governance rules and engagement process. So another one for Mr Canizzaro. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, the report at 5.3.2 before you is seeking 3 outcomes. 1, approving the draft governance rules and the draft election period policy to be released to the community as part of an engagement process. And secondly, the revocation of local law number 1 to also be released to the community, again to be considered under a section 223 engagement process. On the line I have the Governance and Compliance Coordinator as well, Patricia Clive, who will answer any of your technical questions if need be. So the governance rules are a set of rules that have been developed for council by our governance team, and they are substantially based on rules that have been released by the Local Government Victoria. The Local Government Act 2020 has prescribed that the governance rules are adopted by the 1st of September 2020. And many of you will know that is before the election date. The governance rules predominantly are replacing local law number 1, which is our procedures for council meetings, and also the governance rules. As I said earlier, we will be going through a community engagement process. We're proposing that community engagement process to start on the 9th of July, so that's tomorrow, and ending on the 23rd of July. With regard to the election period policy, the governance rules need to incorporate the election period policy therein. Council, you will recall, adopted an election period policy back in February 2020. What is before you today is a redrafted election period policy.
Excuse me, Mr Cannizzaro, would that have been... no, I'm sorry, it's my mistake. I misinterpreted your date and I thought you were wrong, but you were correct. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. It's always good to be correct. So the election period policy has been redrafted to incorporate the requirements of the new Local Government Act 2020 and also to link back to the draft governance rules and also to pick up the current provisions of the Local Government Act 1989, which you will be aware is still in force as we go through a transitional period over the next 18 months or so. With regard to Local Law Number 1, we're proposing to revoke Local Law Number 1 because it just doesn't make sense to have a set of governance rules and a Local Law Number 1 running in parallel. As you know, Local Law Number 1 was adopted recently and has a sunset period of 10 years. That 10-year expiry date is October 2029, hence the urgency to revoke Local Law Number 1 as we move into adopting governance rules. Again, the revocation of the Local Law Number 1 will be subject to an engagement process, and we'll do that under a Section 223 process. Again, starting 9th of July, tomorrow, and concluding on the 6th of August. Happy to field any questions, either to myself or to Patricia.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Cannizzaro, I'm concerned, as I flagged earlier today, about the ability and the timing available for members of the public to partake in the consultation process. Commencing a consultation date from tomorrow morning before we can even get the notification out to the public restricts that amount of time available. Is there any flexibility with the consultation period available to members of the public or any leeway in terms of flexibility in accepting late submissions?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Ellis, we have considered potentially extending it for a week, but we extend it for a week. It only allows us as a council 3 days to consider the feedback from the community and then workshop it through with council. My view is that's insufficient time for us to pull together a really coherent set of governance rules. We just need to remember that the governance rules are replacing the Local Law Number 1. And you'll recall in a briefing session, we did a comparison between Local Law Number 1 and the governance rules. And by and large, most of the elements within the Local Law Number 1 have been captured in the governance rules. To your question, Councillor Ellis, yes, we could extend it by perhaps a few days, but it gives us less time at the other end to really do a thorough review of the community feedback and pull that together in terms of incorporating submissions and then workshopping that with councillors.
Yeah, okay. Look, this is not the forum to drill down, but I can't see why I couldn't suggest perhaps that you could process the submissions as they come in and then just have that flexibility at the end leading to a 3-day period. But anyhow, that said, this is a very important document that impacts upon any person considering standing for council in October. So there may be a fair bit of interest in the document and perhaps even some submissions from some of the progress associations that are forming around the Shire.
Thank you for that, Councillor Ellis. Anybody else wish to ask a question of Mr Cannizzaro or Ms Clive? It's all good, thank you. So it's been moved by Councillor Rotino, seconded by Councillor Toohey. So you wish to say a few words, Councillor Rotino?
I'd just like to thank Mr Cannizzaro and his team for the amount of work that's gone into getting this before us, and yeah, I'm just happy to support it as it's written. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak to it? Councillor Roberts, yes.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to support the recommendation in principle, but I wanted to reiterate some of the thoughts and concerns from myself and other councillors about the clause that states that a meeting can run for no longer than 4 hours. So that's 3 hours with two 30-minute extensions. So I'd like to state for the record that I'm of the opinion that an alteration should be made to the document that allows greater flexibility of the meeting length and perhaps give the chair the ability to extend the meeting as they see fit. So, and as Councillor Ellis stated, we might have some new councillors watching today. I would encourage members of the community to make submissions, as it will form the basis of how council meetings are held going forward. So, a good one to look out for. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. If there's nothing more, I think we'll put this to the vote. So all those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That also is unanimous. So that leads us to 5.4.1, which is a sale of land in a laneway at the rear of 259 Main Street, Bensdale. So again, it's Mr Cannizzaro. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report, as the Mayor has mentioned, sale of a couple of plots of land at 259 Main Street, Bairnsdale, to the owners of that property. In 2004, the owner purchased the property at 124 McLeod Street, behind the premises at 259 Main Street. Planning permit to construct the new building was made around that time, and 259 Main Street, Bairnsdale, at 259 Main Street, Bairnsdale. Recently, a survey was undertaken of the property, which identified that the laneway was still a road and part of a transaction that had not been completed by council and was still in the original owner's name. So, council officers have now, they searched the archives, confirmed that council agreed to close the laneway in 1976 and gazetted the closure in 1978, and council officers have now completed that transaction and the laneway is in council's name. So before you is a set of recommendations to sell a 3.3 square metre lot, known as Lot 1, and another 9 square odd metres with respect to Lot 2, 9.5 square metres, as identified as Lot 2. Happy to take questions.
There you go, councillors. A large land sale. So if you have any questions, please put them forward now. Yeah, Councillor Toohey's got a question.
Thanks, Mr Cannizzaro. Just to be clear, you've said 3.3 square metres and 9.5 square metres. So if, just in case anybody's listening, these are very small allotments, if you will. It's just an oversight with subdivisions or something, just to tidy up the issue properly.
That's correct, Councillor Toohey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Toohey. That's so. Councillor Rotino has moved this. So we have a seconder. Councillor Reeves, thank you. So that gives you the right to speak, Councillor Rattino. No, I thought not. Councillor Reeves, yourself? No. Anyone else wish to speak?
Procedural.
No, it is procedural. It's yeah, what do we call this? Dotting I's, crossing T's. So all right, councillors, all those in favour of this motion? Thank you. It is passed unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Cannizzaro. So that, Mr. CEO, leads us to urgent and other business, which I believe we may have something.
Mr Mayor, with your indulgence, I'd like to put forward an item of urgent and other business in relation to the state borders, Victoria-New South Wales state border.
Go ahead.
Yes. Seconded by Councillor Peltz. All those in favour of Councillor Rattino's urgent and other business. Councillor Ellis, are you there?
I am, Mr Mayor. I think Councillor Rattino needs just to say a few words as why we should admit it, and then once we've done that, I could suggest respectfully that you put it to the vote, that we admit it.
Yep, thanks, process. Thanks, Dick.
Well, it's at the vote now, but he will speak to it. So, yes, going forward, we have eight votes for this, and I would say Councillor Ellis has abstained at this stage. No, he has voted, so it's unanimous. Thank you, Councillor.
Hang on, Mr Mayor.
Sorry.
I didn't abstain from voting, Mr Mayor. I don't want that shown on the record.
Okay, so that was a no vote then, was it?
No. I missed you putting it to the vote because Councillor Rattino hadn't had the opportunity to speak just a few words to say why we should admit it. It's just process, but it's the right...
It's all right. He declined, actually, so sorry that you may not have seen that. He's moved it, but all right. Please, Councillor
Thank you,
Rattino.
Mr Mayor. I'd also like to thank CEO for helping with this. But on Monday, 6th of July 2020, the Victorian-New South Wales Government announced the imminent closure of the Victorian-New South Wales border on Tuesday, 7th of July, so midnight tonight. East Gippsland's been battered over recent time with drought, timber industry transition, bushfire and COVID-19 restrictions, causing significant impact and trauma on the people of the Shire. The closure of border travel is a fifth wave of impact on our communities and one we are very concerned about. When East Gippsland was impacted by the Black Summer bushfires, major freight transport routes were cut and communities were isolated for extended periods of time, 7 weeks. These closures caused significant financial losses to freight movement companies, both going north to Sydney and Canberra, from Victoria and south to Melbourne from New South Wales. The impact of the bushfires and the COVID-19 pandemic on particularly tourism businesses is estimated to run into the millions of dollars. As a shire that borders New South Wales with communities that regularly travel between states for work, healthcare, education, shopping and general activities of daily life, the closure of borders and the potential impost of permits or other measures will further impact and add to the stresses on strained communities in recovery. In considering this item for urgent and other business, I'd like to propose the following motion be adopted. That Council write to both the Victorian Premier, the Honourable Daniel Andrews MP, and the New South Wales Premier, the Honourable Gladys Berejiklian MP, urging them to ensure that border communities will not be adversely impacted by the border closure and that it is managed in a way sympathetic to recent traumatic events in these communities, namely the summer bushfires and COVID-19 more recently. Seek assurances from the Premiers that health and wellbeing needs of our border communities are foremost in any decision making about how the border closure is managed. seek a commitment from the Premiers that major transport routes, i.e. Princes Highway and Monero Highway, remain open and functional to ensure uninterrupted continuation of freight movement along these routes. Seek support from Rural Councils Victoria, Snowy Monero Regional Council and Bega Valley Shire Council to support border communities to be able to maintain their daily life and activities despite border closures.
Thank you. Councillor Peltz.
I would also like to add to that, if I may, and I'd hope that Councillor Rotino would feel obliging to this, but I feel it would be not remiss for us to ask that we actually have a representative in regards to decision making on that state panel. I think that's probably something that we could actually also advocate for, and not just leave it up to the likes of those who actually know to make good reasoning decisions for us, but we actually have a representative of our community to be on the panel making decisions. Does that sound reasonable to other councillors?
So, do we need to actually have
separate issues, Councillor.
Yes, an alternative that an amendment's made to this to Councillor Rotino's motion?
Letter, Councillor Reeves.
Councillor Reeves, speak, please.
Yeah, look, thank you. I'd like to support the motion as it is put on the table at the moment. And the point that Councillor Peltz raises is a good one, and I think that there is another process through MAV advocating for local government representation on the national, what is it called? Councillors, help me here. The National Committee, the National... that the Premiers and the Prime Minister convenes to make these decisions around COVID.
National Cabinet.
Cabinet. Thank you. I was looking at a cabinet across the room, and I think the MAV has a process in train to advocate for local government representation on the National Cabinet, Councillor Peltz. So I would suggest we keep the two separate and urgently write this letter advocating and then support MAV's overtures.
Okay, I would just...
Sorry about that brain fade there.
That's okay. If I may can finish, because I could see you were keen to add there, but I would also like to state that SEATS, the Southeastern Transport Systems, is also in support of this, and also I've also written through to, while I've been here today, Rural Councils Victoria in support of our plea. So I believe that we will actually be covering more avenues than this, and I think it's a really great move forward. So thank you, Councillor Rotino, for suggesting it.
So excuse me, is there any more discussion regarding this? Councillor Ellis, you've mic'd up.
Just to mention on a personal note, my family's been impacted by the closure, and my siblings have been called back to Canberra before the border closes at 12 midnight tonight. It's going to have some quite serious consequences for our tourism industries and general trade, health services, a whole series of impacts on our border communities. It's been highlighted statewide on the Murray River communities, and East Gippsland is in no different position. And that also would, I guess, create problems for people resident in New South Wales who have reason to cross the border for their employment and services as well. So this is a major inconvenience to our communities. We need to find a way around to assist them through this difficult time.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. So we have agreement that at this stage, Councillor Rotino's motion and letter, or wishing to write these letters, stands. Yes, his proposal stands. Excuse me, Councillor, Mr. Canizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We just need to vote on the admission of the item that
as Councillor Ellis
to admit it into urgent and other business.
Yes. Well, he did support it. He did support it. He just felt that there should have been an opportunity to speak before
Thanks
it was
for
admitted.
clarifying that. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, so,
For the minutes, yeah.
it has been admitted. It's been discussed, spoken about, and at this stage, I don't think so. I did ask that. There was anyone else wishing to talk to it?
To the vote, Mr Mayor.
Councillor,
You know, what's going on. Thank you.
Councillor Peltz seconded it, yes. All right, well, we're in agreement, so we'll put this to the vote. So all those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Councillor Ellis, that's more than a vote.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to attract your attention after that for another item, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. So please, speak.
Okay. Mr Mayor, I ask that an additional matter be admitted under urgent and other business, and that being that as a result of a reform to the COAG meetings formula and the creation of a new national cabinet by Prime Minister Morrison, local government no longer has a voice at the highest level of government, and as such I request that Council support us advocating to address that loss of input into the three tiers of government's voice, the third tier of government's voice at the most senior tables. I ask that that be admitted as a matter of urgent and other business, please, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Reeves has seconded that. Thank you. So to admit it, we can put that to the vote. So all those in favour of admitting Councillor Ellis's motion? Councillor Roberts?
Sorry, I haven't seen a copy of the motion, so I've just got trouble supporting it.
It's just been put in as urgent business. So it's discussion point. Councillor Roberts.
There has been a copy circulated to the councillor group, Mr Mayor.
Under email?
Under email.
Okay,
I'm
perhaps
happy for the vote to be put, but I'm just happy to see that the record shows that I didn't support it.
So just for some clarification, Councillor Ellis, and for Councillor Roberts, who's pretty well tuned in on the electronic side of things, what time of the day would you have sent that?
Mr Cannizzaro sent it out for us at around 12.
I've just been told 11:16. So
okay, I see it here. I see it here.
Source that?
Oh, yep, got it.
Quickly, so at this stage, you happy to vote?
I'm still happy to vote against it, but it doesn't mean it doesn't go to be considered. I'll read it now.
Yeah, so all right, so it is admitted, Councillor Ellis, at 8-1 with Councillor Roberts voting against. So you wish to proceed?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I flagged earlier, following the recent announcement by the Prime Minister Scott Morrison that the National Council, the Cabinet has agreed to the formation of the National Federation Reform Council and the cessation of the Council of Australian Governments, COAG, as we've commonly known it for many decades, East Gippsland Shire seeks both the Australian Local Government Association, that's ELGA, and the Municipal Association of Victoria to advocate on our behalf to the federal government. Councils have been represented at every COAG meeting via the ALGA under a long-standing agreement. East Gippsland Shire Council supports the statement from the MAV President, Councillor Coral Ross, that the interests of the community are best served when all three levels of government work in close cooperation. Limiting the representation from local government in this forum raises the concern that it is a contradiction to the fundamental purpose of the three tiers of government, ensuring Australians have someone to represent them at each level of government. Recent events have demonstrated that local governments play a significant role in the planning and delivery of many services that impact on the everyday lives of Australians. This is no more evident than in the workings of our own Shire over the past 6 months. Councils must continue to be part of Australia's national decision making because they know what matters most to their representative communities and how best to deliver it. As such, with that rationale put to you, councillors, I recommend that you support the following motion. That East Gippsland Shire Council, 1, request the federal government include the local government representation through the Australian Local Government Association on the National Federation Reform Council, as it currently exists with the Council of Australian Governments. And 2, seek both the Australian Local Government Association and the Municipal Association of Victoria to advocate on our behalf to the federal government. And 3, through the Mayor, writes to all Victorian councils encouraging them to advocate to the federal and state governments for inclusion of local government on the National Federation Reform Council. Councillors, I've put this recommendation to you and seeking your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Anyone else wish to comment on Councillor Ellis's letter? Okay, Councillor Roberts.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've read the item and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Did you have your hand up, Councillor Buckley?
Just a comment. Yeah, I'd like to see it put in a referendum that we're actually recognised in the Commonwealth, because we really technically don't exist as we're not even mentioned in the federal constitution, or the Australian constitution, if you like. So technically we're a non-event, Councillor Ellis, so I'd suggest you press on with your reforms. I'll use the term reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Buckley. Right, I have nothing further to add at this stage. Councillor Reid.
Okay, so Councillor Ellis, you moved this, and Councillor Reeves, I'm sure you seconded it. Thank you for that. Basically, you have spoken to it, Councillor Ellis, but if you wish to say a couple more words.
Look, the message is strong within the rationale. We particularly in this current COVID era that we're living in, there is more and more responsibilities coming back through to us. I mean, right now we're handing out thermometers, as councillors will be aware of, through our offices, which is part of a national program. We're reliant on funding through the various forms, funding strengths from the Commonwealth, and it's important that when issues arrive of national importance and are identified by local government, that we're there to push these things through. We can't always have benefactory local members who have a pot of gold to distribute to our local government areas. We've got to work as an industry to promote the best for the wider good. So it's most important that we do have a strong voice at that table. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Reeves. You're on mute.
Just to fix that, Councillor Ellis has clearly articulated the rationale, which I agree with, and there's no doubt that more and more is pushed onto local government. We have the least capacity to raise money, but the most ability to make the difference at a local level. And I think if that's the case, then we also need to have a strong voice in those decisions. So thanks, Councillor Ellis, for bringing this to urgent and other business.
Thank you. I think Councillor Ratino, did you wish to speak?
Yeah, just in support of this motion, like ALGA's a really respected advocacy vehicle into our federal counterparts, and I think it's really important that we form part of the National Cabinet discussion.
Thank you. Is there any other speakers?
I too believe it's something of great importance to our region and to all councils in Victoria too, so the more the merrier. Let's get on board.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. Are there no further speakers for or against? I'll put this to the vote. So all those in favour? So we have a unanimous decision. Thank you, councillors. So that would bring us to the conclusion of urgent and other business, Mr. CEO. Thank you. So that moves us to... Yes, please. You've got ahead of me. I was just about to announce that we need to move into camera for the next two items. So, Councillor Toohey, would you like to move us into camera, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Council now close the meeting to the public in accordance with the provision of Section 66(2) of the Local Government Act 2020 to consider items 7.1 and 7.2 as these items relate to private commercial matters.
Seconded by Councillor Rotino. Thank you. So all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Now we will move into closed session. We'll